Hello and welcome to Lost in the Warp Episode 2. I'm Riley and this is my co-host Ethan.
Hello.
And today we are going to start with another quote. Ethan, please take it away.
Ultramarines warriors broke cover, moving in stepped Overwatch patterns. But where any normal enemy would be forced to keep their heads down under such a fusillade, their foe walked tall through enough firepower to reduce entire squads to shredded meat. Rules of Engagement by John French.
So, Ethan, what are we talking about today?
We are going to be talking about the Terminator, specifically the tactical dreadnought armor worn by the elite Space Marines.
All right. I'm excited to talk about this. I know I love using Terminators. Don't really get to do it as much as I used to, but they are so cool both in lore and on tabletop. So let's get into it.
Terminators are one of my favorite units, period. My Dark Angels list runs 4 separate squads of them of different variations.
Yeah.
So I am an avid Terminator fan. So this is an episode I've been excited for.
Alrighty. So without further ado, let's start with the lore of Terminators. Terminators wear this tactical dreadnought armor in the Indominus pattern. This armor primarily belongs to the elite first company of the chapter, depending on which chapter they're in. Sometimes they don't have Terminators or the resources to have this armor because, quite frankly, you can't make more Terminator armor, can you?
It's a very rare asset. It is still manufacturable in the Indominus pattern, but it is exceptionally slow. And when you have something that you manufacture at a rate of, 1 a year, maybe,
Yeah.
The AdMech can't make these very quickly. You run out of them very quick if you start to lose these warriors. So they become a very important asset and something that you don't use lightly.
Yeah, and a year in the 40K universe is simultaneously not very long at all and a very long time because so much is happening so often. So yeah, the battlefield role of Terminators is literally being a chonky boy that lays down some hate. They excel in close quarters combat and have a ton of killing power while sacrificing some speed, but they just can absorb hits like no other.
Right. The original design for Terminator armor was to build a suit of armor for clearing starship corridors. Essentially, the idea was tight spaces, you're not really worried about being flanked. You can just stand in a hallway and pump shells down, or even just charge down it and beat face with a massive fist.
100%. Yeah, it's just all about destruction and holding ground at all costs. So about the armor itself, like what's it constructed of, Ethan?
So it's essentially an adamantium exoskeleton forms like the interior of it that you sit in as the person wearing the armor. And on top of that are layers of plasteel plates and extremely heavy ceramite that form that outer shell, kind of keeping with the standard Space Marine look of heavy pauldrons and large chest plates and massive greaves and boots. But really, it's just built to take hits that no other power armor would be able to withstand.
Yeah, but because it's so heavy, it has these servos kind of built into this exoskeleton that kind of assists the Space Marine wearing it so they can move a little more effectively. They're still slowed down, but they're still able to kind of navigate with the assistance of the servos that are built into the armor itself.
Yeah, and this is one of the coolest things about Terminator armor is it's not only used by Space Marines. The Inquisition actually has variations of Terminator armor.
Oh, yeah.
But Inquisition forces don't like to use it very often because they just, even with the servos, are not strong enough to move it effectively. And so they become even slower and even more likely to be outflanked and outmaneuvered and destroyed.
Yeah, it's chonky stuff and it's not to be messed with. It takes a lot of training and skill to be able to effectively employ Terminator armor. And we'll get into the training in a little bit. But what else is key about some of the armor that allows for its proficiency in combat?
So the big part is, and this is why the Inquisition doesn't love it as much, is because Space Marines have what's called a black carapace. It's one of their gene seed organs, and it essentially allows them to interface with their armor through, neurological signals. and it basically binds their muscular system to the armor. And, normal humans don't have this, so that's why the Inquisition doesn't love to use it as much. But when you're using a Terminator, the integration is even more important because you have a much heavier piece of armor that requires those stronger servos and a stronger individual to be able to use properly.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the best examples of why those servos are so important that comes to my mind is when we listen to the book Alfarius, Head of the Hydra.
Oh, yeah.
They deep strike in to a city on one of the fronts they were deploying on, and Alfarius is taking Terminators with him,
Mm-hmm.
or we think it's Alfarius.
Who knows?
Who knows?
I'm Alfarius. You're Alfarius. We are Alfarius.
The identity of Alfarius aside, they deep strike into this city with Terminators, and in a battle with some of the Xenos that they're fighting, one of the Terminators loses the servos in one of his legs, and he can't really move it as effectively because it's so much heavier without that assist. He can't go quickly, and he essentially gets left behind because he's too slow, and their mission requires at least some variation of speed. Terminators can still do some form of speed, but when their servos are broken, they're essentially useless. Yeah. So he was left behind with another member of the squad, and they were eventually able to link up with him later. But because those servos were gone, the Terminator plate rendered him essentially a liability.
Yeah, he became a sitting duck. And while still very resilient in that armor, he wasn't able to keep up with the pack, unfortunately. So similar to the Tacticus pattern armor that we've looked at, it has a self-contained power unit. It has the life support systems, but it's boosted because these troops are meant to last in the battlefield. They're meant to be a little more resilient and go clear things where they may get cut off, like we were just talking about. So it lasts a bit longer and has just a hardier structure to it in terms of the life support systems. Also, an iconic Terminator thing is teleporting into battle.
Exactly.
All right. The beginning of 10th edition, the Leviathan cinematic, you see the teleport Homer strike down and you're like, what's going on? And then a little bit later, boom, flash of light, Terminators come out, guns ablazing. So
that's still one of the best cinematics I think I've ever seen. I got chills when I saw that during the launch of 10th. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's glorious. And so there's the teleport Homer itself, but there's also the other half of it, which is built into each piece of Terminator armor that allow for that connection and allow for relative accuracy when teleporting these assets into battle. We also have the heads-up display, similar to Tacticus armor, within the Terminator armor. And this, again, environment, threat detection, all that stuff. There's a display unit that shows the Terminator what everyone else in the team or the squad is seeing. But usually this is stuck to like the sergeants to avoid confusion. You want to limit so there's not too much stimulation and too much information because it could take away from your focus on the battle.
It's really hard to know what you're doing when you have 6 different pop-up ads of what everyone else is seeing, clouding your vision.
Yeah. So, I mean, but sometimes the car's extended warranty is very important.
We're trying to reach you about your Terminator suit's extended warranty.
Exactly. All right. There's important information that they just have to know.
One of the most important and iconic parts of the Terminator is the Crux Terminatus on their shoulder.
Definitely.
It's essentially... And I didn't know this. I didn't realize it was actually a stone badge of honor. It's not...
It's stone.
Yeah, it's not any form of ceramite or plasteel or anything like that. It is actually stone that is set into the pauldron of each set of Terminator plate.
That almost... that makes sense to me because typically you paint them white or like a light gray color.
That's generally what we see them as, yeah.
Yeah, personally, because I have a few Terminators in my Death Watch, and... yes, white looks great against black, but usually you see them kind of in those more various levels of stone color. So I did always think they were some type of just painted metal.
I agree. The most important part about the Crux Terminatus is at its core, it is believed to have a tiny shard of the Emperor's armor that he wore when he fought and was killed by Horus.
It's not believed. It's true. 100%. All right. Let me believe this. Let it be true, please.
And it is also said that the Emperor ordered this with his dying breath.
Of course.
That he said he wanted his armor melted down and distributed amongst the Terminator plates. And it is believed that the Crux Terminatus is essentially a ward capable of turning away blows and protecting its wearer from harm, kind of keeping up with that revering the Emperor as a savior
I mean,
idea.
when you look at the Emperor's stuff and how it's kind of been passed out, and some of it we don't know where it is yet, but we know that the lion has the shield.
Right.
We know that Gilliman has the sword, and the armor is supposedly in and distributed through the Crux Terminatus. You just gotta believe that there's something to it because all of those things they're pretty damn good. Like not only on the tabletop but in the lore. Like you not to be trifled with.
Right. I mean, the Emperor's shield giving Lionel Johnson a 3-up invuln is pretty nice.
Big E protects, damn it.
Yes, he does. So we've kind of already talked about who gets to use Terminator armor the most, but really it comes down to the first company or the veteran company of a chapter fields Terminator battle plate.
Yeah.
Like we've already mentioned, it's incredibly rare and irreplaceable. Most of the various patterns, their STC has been lost to time. And a lot of the older patterns that exist, such as maybe Cataphracti pattern or Tartaros patterns, were likely produced before the Horus Heresy began. So in current day 40K, we're talking about over 10,000 years old.
Yeah. I mean, again, going back to like timeline, it's a long time and it's not because, I mean, 10,000 years is definitely a long time in 40K, but so much has happened so fast, it feels like, in that time frame. You know,
so fast, but also so slow. Because Indominus pattern Terminator armor, which is what we see the most now in modern 40K, was being manufactured during the Horus Heresy.
Exactly.
So it was around, but it hasn't changed.
Well, yeah. And when you go back to our previous episode where we talked about the Primaris Marines, Call started developing them immediately following the heresy, more or less.
Within like a couple hundred years.
Yeah. And then you look now, like on the lore table, it feels like Primaris became a thing not too long ago, but it's been 10,000 years. So it's just one of those things where, like, yes, things take a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, a long time really isn't. Even though so much happens and so much is going on. So things have been around for so long. It's just, one of those things where it's just how it is, unfortunately.
Well, and continuing on that vein, we already mentioned that the Indominus pattern Terminator armor is still manufactured. It's just exceptionally slow. It takes so much to go into making Indominus pattern Terminator armor that it takes forever to make a set. And so it is still exceptionally rare. So losing a Terminator, or, for example, I believe there was a book where Ultramarines lost their entire first company, essentially.
Yeah.
That is enormously impactful because they lose that much, chapter relics, Terminator armor, all sorts of things that they just cannot replace.
100%.
At least not effectively.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time to replace that stuff. And honestly, I think we need to just take a moment, pour one out for AdMech, give them a few huminas because they've been working their asses off. And they do a lot. And then we're like, hey, so we lost all our termies. Can we get some more of that stuff? Like, hurry up, guys. Come on, chop. They need some thanks and a little bit of praise because without the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Imperium would be gone.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Another important distinction for Terminator armor that I'm not exactly sure how it works, and I don't think GW's really thought this through very well, is that both Primaris and Firstborn Marines can wear the exact same plate of Terminator armor, despite their size difference.
I like to think that it's kind of like a car seat. If the Firstborn Marine has to get into the Terminator armor, he just puts a few little blocks to stand on inside and kind of just boosts himself. It's like wearing platform shoes or something.
It's like when you see people who cosplay Space Marines and they stand on stilts to get into the right size.
Exactly. Same thing.
Oh my God. Not really sure why that is the way that it is. Hopefully GW will address it at some point, or maybe they won't, and we'll just be stuck with it.
Yeah, I mean, it could also just be and we're speculating, but from a lore stance, armor looks great. it's been working. It's still this big, oversized, awesome stuff. If you can fit both into it, you can fit both into it. You know, it's one of those things where it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's a slow process to make, but if it works for both, it works for both, kind of thing.
Yeah.
One size fits all.
It could also be because Games Workshop wants to sell more models.
Oh, of course. But we don't
I think that's the real reason. In lore, though, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay, so now we're going to just talk about the training, which we touched on a little bit at the beginning, but it takes a lot of training for a veteran Marine to be prepared to use this oversized, bulky armor and be effective with it in close combat.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you go from, essentially, this is like going from wearing your average everyday clothes that you're used to, that you've done a lot of things in, to wearing a set of plate armor without training. It's going to take a lot of getting used to. Your movement's going to be slower.
Definitely.
You're not going to be as effective. But once you've trained with it, you know how to use it.
Yeah, and once that training's complete, oh my gosh, are you effective?
Exactly.
Like, ultimately, it boils down. It is a close quarters combat tool that requires the wearer to just be a master of what they're doing, have done all this training, have taken the time to really meld with their armor like they did with their normal armor. And then they just become a menace in combat because normal armor, you'll shrug a lot of blows. But in Terminator armor, oh boy.
You're going to shrug most everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not invincible. There are still weak points, but you're going to shrug most everything.
Yeah.
And that's the other part, too. You're not just training for how to use the armor. You're also training for a whole new set of combat skills.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're training to clear space hulks, charge fortified positions, and do precision teleport strikes. Mm-hmm. You're not wading through the fire of the battle like a normal Space Marine where you just march right up. You actually have different ways of getting into battle that you need to be prepared and you need to understand how to use.
Yeah, not only different fighting tactics, but also weapons that you don't generally get to use as your standard Space Marine. There's some special weapons that we'll get into, but because you're in this larger armor, you have the ability to take some pretty heavy weapons and just like do a wrist-mounted whatever and go crazy with it.
Weapons that usually cannot be carried by even a Space Marine are now available to a Terminator because they have greater strength, better servo assists, and larger armor so they can handle it. Usually these weapons are vehicle-mounted.
Yeah.
And Terminators can carry them on their arm.
Yeah. So with that, I think it's time to get into some of the weapon options in the lore.
Yeah. So the most standard weapon option that Terminators use, essentially your standard issue, Space Marines have the bolt rifle, Terminators have the storm bolter. It's essentially a cross between like a bolt pistol and an auto bolt rifle.
And it's double barrel.
And yes, it is double barrel as well. It's essentially what it would look like is the bolt pistol size on a normal Space Marine, but it fires like a double barreled auto bolt rifle.
Yeah.
So it's talking about clearing space hulks or charging fortified positions. You're going to clear house very
100%.
quickly with rapid fire. You do have to reload a lot and you have to carry a lot of ammo, but you will do a lot of damage very quickly.
Yeah. And again, this comes back, and a lot of the weapons prove this, but this comes back to clearing confined spaces. This is designed for putting the enemies in a tunnel and just spraying and praying because there's nowhere they can go and you're putting a lot of rounds at them fast.
Exactly.
Which also is similar to the assault cannon, which I love this thing.
It looks so cool.
It is literally a wrist-mounted minigun, and there's nothing else you can really say to describe it. It's just
cool. This is the part of the Leviathan cinematic when 10th edition was getting ready to come out that gave me the most I want.
Yeah, 100%.
I knew about Terminators. I hadn't even started playing Space Marines until 10th edition.
Yeah.
And that right there, it was just like, oh, I want Terminators. I need it.
It was so cool. Yeah, it's like we talked about. This is one of those weapons that's usually mounted on a vehicle or on a stand of some kind. It's not really portable by an individual Space Marine. But when you get an absolute chonker in massive armor, you can just strap that thing on with some duct tape and call it good, and he's going to wreck some house.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of other heavy weapons, we have the heavy flamer, which I have a question.
Yes.
What's better than a flamethrower?
A bigger flamethrower.
Yes, but also wrong. A double-barreled flamethrower. When you need to purge the heretic, you get the heavy flamer. Because it just
Vulcan would be happy.
Vulcan would be very happy. There's not much else to say about the heavy flamer other than the fact that it's just a massive double-barreled flamethrower that lays down hate.
Again, something you usually see mounted on a vehicle.
Exactly.
Just strapped to the arm of a Terminator.
The only other people that carry heavy flamers are the Adeptus Sororitas that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the size of their body and they're lugging that thing around. The Terminator has it strapped to an arm.
Yeah. Well, and you could say that both Terminators and our sisters, our nuns with guns, they both have the power of the Emperor on their side. Through the crux and through the faith.
Yeah.
We can carry large flames. This brings us to the Cyclone missile launcher. Basically, take the Terminator, put a gigantic rack of missiles on top of him, and say, all right, when you want to use these, you're going to just be able to push a button with your mind, make everything in front of you explode with some decent accuracy. Also, you have free hands for more guns. So
yeah, because when you have a Cyclone missile launcher, it's essentially, because Terminator armor has a platform on the back. You basically put 2 giant missile pods on there.
Yeah.
And so you still have your hands. You can still carry your Stormbolter and a Power Fist.
Mm-hmm.
So you're doing double the work. You have both the option to fire the anti-infantry frag missiles, and you have the option to fire the anti-tank crack missiles. So you are an all-around killer in both melee, long range, short range, anti-infantry, anti-tank. This one Terminator is literally a tank in 100%. Human form.
Yeah. It's absurd, and I love it.
It's amazing. Passion. I wish that I could have more than one in every squad, because I would have a squad that is just Cyclone missile launchers.
Oh, yeah. It's literally like human artillery.
It's amazing.
Just walking and blowing things up.
Yeah. So that kind of does it for the ranged weapons that we have for the Terminators. Moving into melee weapons, the most common melee weapon for Terminators to use is a Power Fist.
Punch.
Yeah. It's literally just take the power sword that has the disruptive energy field around it, put it on your fist, make your fist at least 100% bigger.
Yeah, it's huge.
And just punch through just about anything. And you're literally punching through just about anything.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's terrifying, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And in the same vein, you have the chain fist, which it's basically a power fist with an underslung small chain sword attached to it.
Yes.
And while this is great for carving through really anything imaginable, the purpose is when you're a Terminator clearing through a ship, you're going to carve through to the bulkheads. You're going to attack armored targets. If you're on a battlefield, there's a tank up there and you want to make it into more pieces and less solid. So you're going to take your chain fist and you're just going to run at it and bonk, slice, chop, and do amazing, beautiful things.
It's awesome. Some Terminators, like if we're looking at the Assault Squad on the tabletop, have access to the Thunderhammer.
My favorite.
Ye old bonk stick.
My favorite melee weapon in all of 40K. I love a Thunderhammer. It's chef's kiss. It's beautiful.
Yes. Essentially how the Thunderhammer works, we already talked about it a little bit in the Intercessor episode, but it stores potential energy in the head, still using the same energy disruption field that the Power Fist and the Power Sword, most power weapons use. It holds on to that, and when you hit something, it releases a crack with all that stored potential energy, and it sounds like thunder, causing exceptional damage. That's where the name Thunderhammer comes from.
Personally, amazing, beautiful. Personally, I imagine it as just bonk. Every time, just bonk.
Yes.
Because it just, to me, that's satisfying and adds a little bit of fun to all. I mean, Warhammer's fun no matter what. But just the thought of an insane battle and then this Terminator running up and just going bonk and like a comedic cartoon effect is just so funny to me. We also have the Storm Shield, which is on the Assault Terminator side of things. Usually, this is what is carried in addition to that Thunderhammer. And it's this energy shield that it can take the heaviest of blows and just kind of shrug them off even more. So it makes these melee-focused Terminators even harder to take down because they're running at you a little slower than a typical Space Marine, but they're running at you and they're bearing down on you, and you just can't get anything through because they have this big shield in addition to their massive armor. And once they get close enough, the bonk stick comes out.
It's essentially a force field around a tank with a bonk stick.
Yes.
It's awesome.
It's terrifying, but I love it.
One of the last melee weapons that the assault Terminators have access to is the lightning claws. And essentially take a power sword, make it tiny, put one on each of your knuckles on both fists, and it's Wolverine time.
We slicing.
It's amazing. They are essentially, for those Terminators who don't want to hit someone, they want to watch their guts pour out, and they want to make it happen.
I love it.
Terminators do also have access to standard power weapons, such as power swords. Not much is really different from the standard Astartes power sword. It has the energy disruption field, and it's a sword. It slices, it dices, it does the job.
It do power sword things.
Exactly.
So we talked a lot about the teleport capabilities for Terminators. So when they're deployed, you mostly see that teleport capability because they move slower. So you want to get them right into the heat of the battle next to something big as soon as you can. This negates vulnerability of that slow movement, and it adds to the element of surprise. Like if you're in the heat of battle, let's say you're a Tyranid and you have your own free will, kind of, hive mind, whatever, but you're in the heat of battle, and then all of a sudden there's this shining light, and boom, large dudes with big guns or giant hammers are right next to you. What is your immediate thought?
Well, I'm a Tyranid, so biomass, yum. But
okay,
if I'm
fine,
anything
you're
else,
a cultist.
If I'm anything else, it's uh-oh.
Yeah. So it gets that element of surprise, and it hurts.
Additionally, Terminators can be delivered to the battlefield through the good old Land Raider.
Ah, yes.
I didn't know this, but that was actually part of the reason that the Land Raider was designed, was to deliver Terminators to the battlefield. The Terminators essentially drive up in the Land Raider. I don't remember which variant specifically it was, but one of the first ones was designed, not necessarily designed, but used to deliver Terminators to the front.
Yeah, because they're a bit bigger than a Rhino. They can house a couple large dudes.
And the front swings down, they charge out, and smash face.
Yeah. And they can also be dropped through a Storm Raven. Fly the gunship over, boom, homie doing superhero landing and wreck and shop.
Exactly.
There's a few ways to get them into battle. The big thing is they're not just walking from the back of the field all the way to the front lines. They have to be brought in somehow because they're slow.
Exactly. You have to make up for the fact that they're slow, because if you don't, they're going to get outflanked. And their rear is still a little bit more vulnerable than their front. So they're going to be, having a little bit more vulnerability in the back.
Yeah, because their whole purpose is kind of that closer confrontation in combat.
Exactly.
They need to be at a very close to medium range, depending on which type of Terminator it is. But if they're at a long range and something gets around the back of them or something, they're going to get shot out or killed before they have a chance to really do work.
Exactly. Some fun facts that we stumbled across while doing research for Terminators. There are some chapters that do not currently have a full Terminator-clad first company, or the resources to do so.
Yeah.
The Salamanders, the Minotaurs, and the Iron Hands are some of the most notable ones. The Iron Hands don't wear Terminator armor, just as a general principle. Some of their officers do, but I personally believe this is partly due to Ferrus Manus developing the Gorgon pattern Terminator armor.
Oh, yeah.
That pulled a dreadnought and slowly killed its inhabitant.
Yeah.
Because it was very radioactive and would eventually kill whoever was inside it. I think that
it's kind of like a bad juju thing.
They
don't really trust it.
They may have gotten bad vibes and said no thank you in the future. The Minotaurs only have a couple of suits, and they were given to them by the Inquisition. I think it just doesn't really match their style.
Yeah, they're not super slow-moving, hulking type.
They just want to kill everything.
Yeah, instead. They move pretty quick. I really like this one, though, the Salamanders. It fits so well with their aesthetic and their whole thing about forging. They encourage their elite warriors and their veterans to just forge and build their own armor. And this is cool because it also frees up their tech marines to maintain other things
Yeah.
instead of that Terminator plate. So when you're this veteran of the Salamanders, you take the time to build and craft your own Terminator plate, and then you take care of it, which I
Exactly.
think is really cool.
I think this is my favorite fun fact. Belisarius Call,
The,
the Archmagus Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus.
the Shenanigan Lord.
Yes, he tried to make Terminator armor better, and he's just fuming because he couldn't. He failed.
This might come back to why the Firstborn and Primaris use the same armor. Because when Call was developing Primaris Marines, he couldn't make something better for them.
Yeah, that very well could be. Also, Chaos Marines do use Terminator armor.
They do?
They do. Lots of Terminator Lords wear Terminator armor. They do have very few suits of it, though.
Okay.
So if an aspiring champion wants to move up in the ranks and get Terminator armor, he either has to kill an Imperial Space Marine that has Terminator armor and steal it from him, or kill the current Chaos Lord that has the Terminator armor he wants.
That feels very orc to me.
It kind of does.
Because it's like, I want to be big bad guy. I'm going to go crump the bigger, badder guy and become him.
It does feel very much like that. And again, it's just because Terminator armor is so rare.
I like that. That's cool. So we've done a pretty good overview of Terminators in the lore. And now we're going to see how they perform on the tabletop, what their capabilities are, and go from there.
Yeah. So as a faction on the tabletop, Space Marines have the Army rule, Oath of Moment, for the most part. It works very well in the Terminator's favor. They have some weapons that hit on 4s rather than 3s, and Oath of Moment really helps with that, especially in your assault squads. We are going to be combining Terminator assault squads and the Terminator squad for the sake of this video, just because they both kind of fit together pretty well.
Yeah, and they're not like a special type of Terminator, which we can get into at a later time. There's different armies that have super special Terminators, but for this, the two like core Terminators we're going to cover.
Right. So just to go through the basic stat line, Terminators have 1 more toughness than a standard intercessor. They have toughness 5.
That does help a lot.
Which is a very big break point for a lot of weapons. A lot of infantry weapons are toughness or are strength 4.
Yeah.
And so when you are targeting other infantry that are on their same level, it feels good. But when you target Terminators, all of a sudden you're wounding on 5s, which feels a lot different. And it feels a lot better when you're a Terminator.
Oh, 100%. Jumping from 4s to 5s to wound is a big jump.
It goes from 50% to only a 1/3 chance.
Yeah. So,
which very nice. And also helping with their toughness, they have a 2-up armor save.
Yep.
And a 4-up invulnerable save.
Yeah.
Which makes them feel exceptionally chunky because just about no matter whatever's shooting at you, the worst you're going to be is having a 50-50 chance of saving.
Yeah. And this really helps because it allows your Terminators to actually get in because they have that they move slow.
They do.
So making them that little bit tougher, making them have a better save, gives them more of a chance to get in and actually do the work that they're designed to do.
Exactly. They have a leadership score of 6+. Leadership doesn't really matter that much in 10th edition just because Battle Shock doesn't really do much. They do have 3 wounds each, which feels like a very good point for them to be at, to be elite infantry, given that a normal Space Marine has 2.
Definitely.
It definitely feels like, even if you're getting shot at with a bunch of 1 or 2 damage guns, it's going to take multiple hits before you actually lose a model, which feels good for Terminators.
Yeah. The thing I like about that, like tying it back to one of my armies, like I have a Custodes army and most Custodians are around 3 wounds. So putting a Space Marine in this really good heavy armor that makes them kind of the same level wounds wise as a Custodian, this, holy guard of the Emperor, it helps. It makes it feel like it has a lot of like importance. It's not just this.
Exactly.
It's just a Space Marine. No, Terminators are like a serious thing.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, they do move slow. They only have a 5-inch movement, so it's 1 inch less than your standard intercessors. But it's not so much less that you feel like, oh, I'm not getting anywhere.
Exactly.
They do move slow, but you will get there eventually.
Yeah, and that's why you typically you'll put them in deep strike. You'll kind of wait, drop out the teleport homer, put them in a vehicle that can get them out where they need to be. So you're not necessarily deploying them early on. You're waiting for the battle and using them as a utility where there's an issue on the battlefield.
Right. Moving into unit composition,
Mhm.
the Terminator squad is 170 points for 5 models, or 340 for 10.
Mhm.
One heavy weapon per 5 models. So you can take your assault cannons, your heavy flamers, your cyclone missile launchers. If you have 10 models, you get 2 of them. You get to take your pick. If you only have 5, though, you only get 1. When I run my Terminators, I tend to have 1 squad with an assault cannon and 1 squad with a cyclone missile launcher.
Yeah, I would agree.
I tend to pair them with different leaders based on what I need them to do, but having that utility is nice.
Yeah.
You can also take your chain fists and your power fists as your melee weapons for everyone in the squad, and you can also choose to give the sergeant a power sword.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking only one heavy weapon per 5, like it kind of upsets me. But I'm used to running Deathwatch Terminators, which have access to more heavy weapons. It to me, like having that extra oomph really helps.
It does.
And when you go back to a normal Terminator squad that can only have one heavy weapon, you're like, dang. But then you see them like actually perform on the tabletop. You're like, okay, Terminators are still really good.
Well, and that's the thing is because I have 2 units of normal Terminators. I run them as Deathwing Terminators, but they still have the same weapon options for the most part. I always have one with an assault cannon and one with a cyclone missile launcher. They both do a lot of work.
Yes, they do. Can confirm. I've been absolutely clobbered by them.
Yes, even though they're one-offs. And this is what I actually really like about Terminators. They're heavy weapons, even though they're one-offs, actually feel like they do the job.
Yeah, because like in a normal squad of Space Marines, when you just have the sergeant with, their special weapon or something, it doesn't feel like it's enough sometimes.
Exactly.
But with Terminators, it does, like you were just saying.
And that's one of the things that's really cool about the Assault Squad is all of them get the same weapon options.
Mhm.
There's no one-offs. They all have a Thunderhammer and Storm Shield normally, or you can swap that out for Twin Lightning Claws.
Yeah.
You have all of the same weapon options. You can build them exactly how you want. That being said, the Assault Squad is a little bit more expensive. It's 180 points for 5 or 360 for 10.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more expensive, and that's just because they hit really hard in melee.
Well, yeah, if you get them in, they're going to go to work on something.
Absolutely.
Like if you're taking the Thunderhammers, that is the squad of vehicle destruction. That's their whole thing.
Yep.
And then if you're taking the Claws, they're going to drop in somewhere and take a horde of infantry and turn it to a pulp. So it makes sense that they're costed a little bit higher because they have a ton of utility. But with that, you just have to remember Terminators move slow, so you have to have a way to get them in quick and not let them get shot out. Because some big weapons, even though they're tougher and everything, big weapons will take them down quick.
Yeah. Moving into the weapons category, the Stormbolter. I actually really like the Stormbolter. It's got the same range as a bolt rifle.
Mm-hmm.
It has the same amount of attacks, but if you're within half range, it
Get that
has rapid fire
fire
too.
Yeah.
So you double your attacks, and it's essentially it's a double bolter. It's a double barreled. That's what it does.
I mean, and similar to a bolter, like because it is a bolter with more shots, but it is that feeler gauge. Like if you can get shots through, great. It really depends on what you're targeting with it. But having the ability to just put out some shots before you get in with the power fists or whatever you're using really, really helps.
It's awesome. And if you have a squad of 5 Terminators that have 5 Stormbolters, you're putting out 20 shots.
100%.
Which I played a game against Votan a while back, and I targeted a squad of Darthkin warriors with Stormbolters, and I was at 9-inch range, so I had my rapid fire.
Yep.
I killed 3 or 4 just with Stormbolters.
Yeah.
And then I charged in and was able to kill the rest of them.
Yeah, it really softens the load of what the Terminators will have to do once they get into melee. It's that nice prep, kind of
Exactly.
get the battlefield ready and then charge in and clean it all up.
Yeah. Moving into the assault cannon, there's a reason that I always take an assault cannon when I take
100%.
Terminators. It's the same range as a bolter. It has 6 attacks, which is huge, especially if you pair it with something like a Terminator Librarian that gives it sustained hits.
And it already has the devastating wounds.
It does.
Which is the biggest impact for it. Because when you get those wounds through with that strength 6, that's gonna be pretty good.
It's gonna be pretty good against
most
about
infantry.
Any infantry, and even elite infantry too.
Yeah.
Unless you devastating wound, it may not get wounds through, but it's still gonna wound a fair amount of the time because
100%.
most elite infantry is toughness 5 or 4. So you're gonna be wounding on at least 3s.
Yeah.
So it feels pretty good, and the devastating wounds have saved me more than a couple times.
100%.
I have killed things that I had no right killing just because of the devastating wounds with the assault
Yeah,
cannon.
the devastating wounds cannot be understated how much they help.
Yes. The Cyclone missile launcher on the tabletop, I love it. I always have one.
100, yeah.
I usually end up using the crack profile.
Well, the crack is nice because it has really good utility. It's less shots. So like frag has 2d6 with blast, and crack has just 2 shots. They both hit on 3s, but when you have a strength 9, AP -2, and you're doing that d6 damage, that's a like disruptor for vehicles, for heavy units of any kind.
Exactly.
That you have the range to just, hey, there's something causing problems way the heck over there. I'm going to just plink a few shots over there. You know, if something gets through, it has the potential to really mess things up.
Exactly. And it has that 36-inch range.
Yep.
It's the longest range thing that the Terminators have access to.
Yeah.
And it has the ability to make some real difference, especially against vehicles. But it also can do a lot against infantry, too. 2d6 shots with strength 4, no AP, and 1 damage still does a lot of work.
Yeah.
Against lighter infantry. It feels very good.
Yeah.
The heavy flamer, it's exactly what we think of when we think of a heavy flamer. It ignores any cover. It automatically hits. You have d6 shots.
Yep.
And because it's a heavy flamer, you actually get better strength. You have 5, and you have 1 AP.
Yeah.
So it feels pretty good. I mean, it's the heavy weapon that you would expect from a Terminator.
Yeah. I don't really take these or see these taken too often.
I don't really either.
But if you're building Terminators, like if you're building normal Terminators, not assault Terminators, for the sake of trying to clear out infantry hordes, this is a pretty useful one because you're automatically hitting. You're doing that AP -1 at strength 5, so you're very likely to wound. So super standard 1 wound infantry. Each time you're going to clear at least a couple.
Yeah. I'm not sure I would say it's better than the assault cannon or the Cyclone missile launcher.
I don't think so, but it does have its purpose.
But it does still have its purpose. It does still feel good.
Yeah.
Moving into our melee weapons, though, let's just start with the Power Fist because that's the simple one.
It's the classic.
It's the classic. It's the standard issue. 3 attacks on 5 Terminators with a Power Fist feels awesome.
There's nothing better. And like we played recently, and there was a point, it wasn't with Terminators, but I was rolling 60 dice to hit.
Yeah.
And there's, even when you're rolling 15 dice, 3 attacks, 5 Terminators, when you're picking up, like you have to hold the dice in both hands. It's so fun.
It feels good.
It's such a good feeling. And even if it doesn't roll well, it's just so much fun to throw a pile of dice.
It is.
And
especially if you're targeting your Oath of Moment target with these, because you get to reroll your failures 100%. And it feels very good.
Yeah.
And we'll get into more of what happens with Terminators when they target the Oath of Moment target later. But with a Power Fist, you're hitting on 3s. So you're already going to hit likely 66% of the time.
Yep.
So you're feeling pretty good about that. And when you're strength 8, AP2, damage 2,
you're doing damage.
It's super versatile because you're going to be wounding anything lighter than, even elite infantry, you're going to be wounding on 3s.
Yeah.
And vehicles, you may be wounding on 5s, but it's still going to be AP2 damage 2 when it gets through.
Yeah. And like, that's where if you're focusing your Terminators, like their purpose is to destroy vehicles, you just swap it for the Chain Fist. Because Chain Fist is the same exact profile. Everything's the same, except for it hits on 4s, but it has anti-vehicle 3-up. So it's that trade-off. It really just depends on what you want your Terminators to do.
Well, exactly. And especially with the Chain Fist paired with Oath of Moment, it's going to feel really good.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to feel really good because you're re-rolling those hits. And you're wounding on 3s no matter what. And those are critical wounds on 3s. So if you have any other shenanigans that allow you to give, devastating wounds, this hurts a lot.
100%.
The power weapon, I don't think I ever see people take them unless it's in a single monopose, one way to build model.
Yeah. I don't see it used too much. Because the sergeant is the only one that can take it.
Right.
And in a squad of 5, it's just not worth it. Yeah, you get one more attack and all that, but the strength is so much lower and you're dealing less damage on each wound that gets through. So it's just better to take an extra Chain Fist or Power Fist.
Exactly. This is the one instance in Terminators where having a one-off isn't actually beneficial.
Yeah, you want that weight of dice where, and it makes the game easier because it's just you all roll at the same time. But 100%, like the power weapon, it has its purpose, but it's very rarely used because it's outweighed by something else.
Yeah. Assault Terminators have access to the Thunderhammer, which is paired with the Storm Shield.
Yep.
This combo is deadly because
I agree.
you have your bonk stick
You
that
have
does your
bonk.
devastating wounds, and it has the same profile as the Power Fist.
Mhm.
And you get the Storm Shield, which gives you an extra wound. So you have 4 wound Terminators, which
Yeah.
is extraordinary.
Oh, it's beautiful.
They go from already feeling really tough to feeling even tougher.
That extra wound does like. There's so many times that just you and I have played where one wound makes a massive difference.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you have 5 Terminators that each have one more wound, oh my gosh, it's
huge.
absurd.
Because someone will say, "Ah, yes, I have my damage 3 gun that's a Terminator deleter."
Hold
on a second now. I have 4 wounds
per Terminator. I
per
mean,
Terminator.
it's the same reason that like in my Custodes, I will each block of guard, I'll always have at least one with a shield because it exists purely for absorbing those attacks.
Exactly.
Like if attacks get through, it's always going to be the first custodian that I pull from the table. But it takes 2 whole attacks at 3 damage to take it out. It adds utility. But then when you have like these are better in my opinion because not only do they have the extra wound, they also still all have the bonk stick.
Yeah.
In Custodes, it's a trade-off. You don't get the spear if you have a shield. So, but here it's like, everyone gets to have fun.
It's pretty good. And similar with the Lightning Claws, these are if you're building your Terminators to go take out infantry. They will just absolutely mulch an infantry squad.
Yeah. 100%.
I cannot tell you how many times I've had when I've been playing guard and I've gone up against my friend who has Black Templars, and he had an Assault Terminator squad that was a 10-man squad that had 5 Thunderhammers and 5 Lightning Claws. He would charge a 20 block of guard, and I would be lucky if I had any models left before the Thunderhammers even got to hit.
Yeah, you look at it, and a 10-man block of Assault Terminators is 360. That's a lot in an army list, but it's so useful, especially if you build it half and half, because half of them are designed for vehicle destruction and half of them are designed for infantry destruction. So, and you can build full one way or the other, but when you build them half and half, they have the utility and they can pretty much stand up against anything.
Exactly. There's something that you really have to play around when you're the opponent, and the Lightning Claws have twin linked, which means that even if they're going up against tougher targets, you have 2 chances with every dice to wound. So you're still doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
The Lightning Claws may not be doing as much damage, but when you have 5 attacks with each of them, you're throwing a lot more dice around, so you still are going to get a lot of damage through.
You have weight of dice, and like we said, you have twin linked. So there's a really good chance that you're going to be getting a lot through and really just wrecking shop. Like you said, your guard, you'd be lucky if you had a model standing in a 20 block when it faced effectively a full 10 block of Terminators, but really the problem was those Lightning Claws for
Exactly. Many times my guardsmen have been mulched by Lightning Claws.
Yeah, such is the life of a guardsman.
It is.
Unfortunately.
I think usually I would have like 2 or 3 standing, maybe.
Yeah.
Because, he's hitting on 3s. He's not going to drop that many. If he happened to Oath of Moment them, they're just gone. They're deleted. Because with 25 attacks, re-rolling the failures, you're going to get mulched. It's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
Moving into abilities, though, Terminator's abilities feel very good.
They feel accurate.
They do.
To the lore.
They feel very lore-inspired, and I really do appreciate that.
100%.
Both the Terminator Assault Squad and the normal Terminator Squad have access to the Teleport Homer ability, which essentially how it works is, after the armies have been deployed, you set up a teleport beacon. It's a little token that comes with every kit.
Yep.
You set it up in no man's land, outside of your opponent's deployment zone. And what that does is it's a little marker that you can use the rapid ingress stratagem, which allows you to put a unit from Deep Strike onto the battlefield in your opponent's movement phase.
Yep.
You can use that stratagem for 0 command points for free.
Yep.
You can just do it. And you can set your Terminators up within 3 inches of that beacon, but they have to be 9 inches away from an enemy model. So you don't necessarily get to use it a lot, but it forces your opponent to play around. There might be Terminators coming up there, and it might force them to say, oh, I need to make sure that that doesn't happen. I'm going to abandon this objective that I was shooting for and play to that instead.
Yeah, 100%. Like when you place that homer, if you do it right, you're forcing your opponent to make a decision, and that can change the whole tide of the battle, because you don't necessarily have to deploy the Terminators super early in the game. You can wait until you like really need them. But so long as that teleport homer sits there, your opponent's going to be wondering, should I even play with it? Should I be worried? Because at any moment, you can just be like, okay, bringing them in, boop, and you're just ruining their day a little bit.
Yes.
So
And it feels really cool when you actually get to do it.
Yeah, and every time, like, and you and I have talked about this at length, but usually we play the game in a way that we're imagining everything as like a cinematic.
Oh, absolutely.
And we love like the narrative style of play where everything has a purpose. And, sometimes something big just gets taken down by this individual guardsman. And it's amazing. And that's a hero. But when you place this homer and then boom, the battle's against you and it's not looking good, you slam down those Terminators right when you need them. And I always think back to that cinematic from the start of 10th edition. And they're just coming in and doing everything they can to really change the tide of the battle. And it like you said, it just feels so good.
Well, and for me, my mind always goes, because I'm playing Dark Angels, my mind always goes, my Green Wing detachment is getting pushed back, they're not feeling good, and then all of a sudden their elite Deathwing friends come to save them,
100%.
and it just, they wreck face, and it feels so good. I love it. It just makes me happy.
Yeah.
Moving into their specific abilities, though, the Terminator Squad has the ability Fury of the First, which allows them to ignore all modifiers to their ballistic skill and weapon skill when they're attacking. And when they're attacking the Oath of Moment target, they get +1 to hit. This is a very good ability, especially against armies that utilize stealth a lot, because stealth gives you a -1 to your hit. You now no longer worry about that.
Yeah.
You just take the shot.
Yeah. And when you're not worrying about stealth, you take, what is it? 3 up to hit and turn it into a 2 up.
If it's your Oath of Moment target, absolutely.
Yeah. It makes the Terminator so much more effective.
It makes them effective, but also from a lore standpoint, it really feels like the Space Marines have taken their Oath of Moment. They are oathed to that moment to kill that thing. And they're going to do it with much more effective firepower and melee.
Yeah. I mean, going back to like we were just talking about, like we see things through a narrative lens usually. You're having a problem on the battlefield and you're calling in the reinforcements and you're pledged to take this thing on. And boy, howdy, are they going to come in and actually do some work. And this ability really helps that happen.
It really does. Moving into the Assault Squad, though, they have the ability Terminator Assault, which essentially what it does is after the Terminator Assault Squad is charged, each enemy unit in engagement range of it must take a battle shock test.
Yeah.
Narratively, it feels cool.
Yeah.
In terms of lore, it feels really cool. But in terms of the tabletop, it doesn't feel great.
Because Battle Shock really isn't all that amazing.
Yeah. It kind of encapsulates the idea of like, oh God, we're getting charged by the elite warriors.
Yeah, from
what
the
do we do?
lore and narrative standpoint, of course. But tabletop,
Yeah. I think that on the tabletop, it just doesn't feel great just because Battle Shock doesn't matter. But when it does matter, it can make a big difference.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't dislike the ability, but it's not as good as Fury's the First.
I agree. And kind of to play devil's advocate, it makes sense that the Assault Squad has not as great of an ability because they have the potential to do a lot more work than the standard Terminator Squad.
And that is fair for game balancing.
It does kind of balance it out. But like you said, there could be a better ability in there, 100%. From lore, feels great. Tabletop, not so much.
So how do we feel they did in terms of comparing to the lore?
I think they do a pretty darn good job.
I agree.
Not only the abilities, but the weapons and the stat lines, generally speaking. Like, it feels good. That toughness 5, it's a great spot to have elite infantry at.
It is. Just because it is that nice break point for weapon strength. A lot of infantry weapons are going to be strength 4 or lower, but when you're toughness 5, it feels good.
Yeah, 100%.
And the 2-up armor save with the 4-up invuln feels really good when your big guns only have a 50-50 chance of killing a Terminator, or even wounding a Terminator.
Yeah.
And your small guns go through to a 2-up save that gets past the majority of the time. Maybe you'll get a plink wound here and there, but that's all you're going to do.
Yeah, and it just allows them to kind of match that just big hulking, really hard to kill, thing on the table.
Exactly.
And the 5-inch move that they have, it can be frustrating because they move slower, but it is accurate and it feels right. They're
Yeah.
not going to be as quick as a standard Space Marine. They're going to be a little slower. You're going to have to find a creative way to get them into the fight.
And that's why they have a teleport homer.
Exactly.
I love it because they do feel like the slow and steady killer that can weather any storm that comes at them.
100%.
Obviously, they do get still killed by things if you roll badly, but they feel good overall.
Yeah.
The weapons, too, all of the heavy guns feel impactful when they do work.
Mhm.
They can be a little bit swingy. Sometimes you don't hit or do your devastating wounds from your assault cannon.
Yeah, it always
But-
comes down to the dice.
Exactly. But they do feel impactful when they're doing their job.
Yeah.
Stormbolters, again, I love the Stormbolter. I have no good reason to because it doesn't really do that much all the time, but it feels awesome when you target light infantry with them and just mow them down.
Yes, 100%. They have their purpose and they feel accurate to the lore. Like when you look back, like we were talking about these Terminators like clearing some corridor in a ship. When you're spraying at infantry and cultists or whatever, you're gonna be taking them out, and it feels like that on the tabletop. Not
Yeah.
as effective against big armored targets, but
Right.
That's
But
accurate. That's what
just-
we're looking for.
They feel good, and I love it.
Yeah.
The Power Fists and Chain Fists also feel good in their respective ways. I mean,
100%.
especially when you have 5, your weight of dice with that many fists, it's going to feel good. It's going to do the job.
Yeah.
And it feels accurate to what we see in the lore.
Yeah, I totally agree. The Thunderhammer and the Storm Shield combo, I think it's my favorite for Terminators. I'm biased because I love the Thunderhammer, but getting the extra wound, having the massive bonk stick, like it just lets you keep your Terminators alive a little bit longer. And once they get in, they do some freaking work.
And it does feel very accurate to the lore because, like, I've read some books with Terminators in them, and they feel like they're very difficult to kill. And every once in a while, there will be one with a Storm Shield, and they feel even more difficult to kill. So it does make sense.
Yeah.
And again, with the Lightning Claws, you just channel that inner Wolverine.
Yeah.
It feels so good. I personally haven't read any material that has Lightning Claws in them, but from what I've heard from people who have, it sounds like they represent very well on the tabletop.
And I can't speak to this because I haven't read it yet. And to my knowledge, Night Lords don't use Terminators too much, but I have the omnibus sitting on my shelf. I need to start reading it because Lightning Claws are a Night Lords thing.
And
you
speaking of, actually, I just remembered I did read the Dark Angels omnibus, and one of the short stories in there was a Terminator assault against a Night Lord's headquarters, where Night Lord's Terminators teleported in while the Dark Angels teleport was happening, and they ended up fighting together, and they did have Night Lord's Terminators with Lightning Claws.
Beautiful. There we go. I was proved wrong and right at the same time. I love it. So yeah, I'm gonna have to do some reading because I think the Night Lords are super cool, if not a little concerning, but also just their aesthetic and using those Lightning Claws is awesome. Yeah. Anyway, the power weapon.
It's the only thing I don't like on their data sheet, but you can easily get around it by just not taking one.
Yeah, like it kind of has a place from like a, this is the leader perspective, but it's not as useful as everything else.
Exactly. It does feel about right with the lore. I mean, we mentioned this in the Space Marines Intercessors episode. It feels right for what it does, but as a one-off, it doesn't feel good on the tabletop.
Agreed.
So we don't love it. We don't hate it. It's just there.
Yeah. We were just talking about the abilities on the tabletop. The Fury of the First, and like that just feels almost perfect in my mind. It's the quintessential Space Marine thing. Like when you're dealing with elite Marines or elite whatevers, taking your elite unit and just giving them something better is, it feels nice. Yeah.
It feels so cinematic, and it feels very narratively cool.
Yeah.
And it feels just about perfect with what we know about the lore.
Yeah, it fits so nicely.
The Teleport Homer, again, the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It's exactly what the Terminator does in the lore. They teleport in, and they wreck face.
100%.
I mean, you do have a 9-inch charge, but if you attach things like a Terminator Captain to them, you eliminate that because you get a free reroll. But it just feels so cool. It feels very narratively based and very lore based.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that happens in the lore, and like part of it comes down to game balance and making sure that it's doable. We talked about this a bit at the end of our first episode, but when you take something that is the prime thing in the lore, a lot of people started playing 40K because of that 10th edition opening cinematic,
Yeah.
and that focused on the new Terminators because a new Terminator kit was coming out. And the whole thing, they teleported in when things got bad. So when you have an ability that makes that feel accurate, it's so nice.
Literally everything about that cinematic is what got me to play Space Marines.
100%.
Because my dad watched it and he wanted to play Tyranids. And I watched it and I loved every little bit about the Terminators and the Dreadnoughts and all that. It was just amazing.
Mhm.
And we decided, let's just split a Leviathan box. And that's how I started Dark Angels, was because I got the Leviathan box.
I love that story because it's one, it brings your dad into it. And I love your dad. He's awesome. But two, it's just such a good way. Like, because when people buy those big boxes, you get it for a half of the army and then you sell it off. It just makes me happy to see that like two people went on it together and split it, and then both had a ton of fun with it.
Exactly. Whenever I
just
go
love that
home,
stuff.
we always play at least one game with the Space Marines and the Tyranids,
Yeah.
or my guard, or whatever we have.
Yeah.
And it's always so fun.
Yeah. I mean, we even did the three-way game with you, your dad, and myself.
Mhm.
And it was your guard, his Tyranids, and my Death Watch. And it's just so much fun to have, like, bring people into the fold through those big combo boxes and to know that something that you really enjoy, you can almost just show a cinematic to someone, and that's the convincing factor.
Yeah.
Which is a huge props to GW and some of their marketing because such a fun hobby. And when it's so accurate, bringing it back to what we're talking about here, when it's so accurate to how it plays on the tabletop, it makes it just feel right.
We also have the Terminator Assault ability.
Yeah, it's okay, but like we've talked about, Battle Shock, it doesn't really have too much of a use.
Yeah. In terms of reflecting the lore, though, it does a very good job.
I agree. And it fits the lore well because there's nothing more terrifying in my mind than a bunch of hulking Terminators bearing down on you with hammers or lightning claws. And you're just like, oh crap, I don't know what to do. Like,
Yeah.
that feels right, but tabletop wise, it doesn't serve as much of a utility.
If somehow they make Battle Shock more useful, I think it will definitely kind of reflect the lore a little bit more. In terms of just the ability itself, it reflects very well. It's just,
I agree.
it doesn't necessarily translate to how useful it is on the tabletop.
100%.
I think it's time to give them a score.
So I've struggled with this because I want to give both of them a pretty high score, but it's also very situationally dependent.
It is.
And it also really, like, I don't want to be like, oh, episode 2, we're going to give something the highest score possible, But I think putting the standard Terminators around an 8, maybe 7.5, and then putting the Assault Terminators kind of in the same boat. The biggest downfall for the Assault Terminators is that ability in my mind.
I love how it reflects the lore, and that makes me want to give it more, but the fact that it just isn't very useful means that I can't really justify giving it more.
Yeah, so I think like a 7 for the Assault and maybe around that 8 mark for the standard.
I almost want to give them an 8.5 just because everything about them feels so good, and the only real downside we found was the power sword.
Yeah, I would agree. I think jump them up to that 8.5.
8.5. I don't want to be, because I really want to give them a higher score, but they do still feel like they die a little bit too easily, especially if you roll poorly.
I think, again, going back to situational, what are you running them into?
Exactly.
Like, if someone has a bunch of big guns, tanks, whatever, in the back line, and you're dropping your Terminators midfield, they're going to get blown up before they can do anything.
And
because a really big gun, even against the Terminators, it's going to destroy them.
If you roll poorly, it's going to destroy them.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that does kind of keep them at that like 8.5 to 8 mark, for me, is when you compare them to things like Gravis Armor.
Yeah.
Because Gravis Armor, while it doesn't improve the save that they have from standard Space Marines, they have a toughness of 6.
Yeah.
which doesn't really feel like it.
That feels like it's too much for them.
That feels like it almost needs to be for the Terminator.
Yeah, it needs to be flipped.
But like, I understand why they didn't for game balancing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I feel like if Gravis armor didn't have a toughness of 6, I would put him closer to a 9.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Really, what it comes down to is, yes, they hit like trucks. Yes, they take large hits and they can just shrug things off. But it comes down to rolling the dice, the situations you put them in, and really how you use them. Because if you're not careful and you don't know what you're doing, they can die really quick. It's one of those things where they match the lore really, really well. But on the tabletop, you have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, they're going to underperform and not match that lore.
Right. Which is why I think we can probably settle with an 8.5 for the Terminator squad, and then maybe a 7.5 for the Assault Terminators.
Yeah, I think a 7.5 is fair for them because really the one thing that's a downside is just that ability for them. But it is kind of a big downside. They perform so darn well on the tabletop if you use them right, but effectively not having an ability really hinders them.
Yeah,
So
and even one misplay with a Terminator squad,
it can be the end of them.
It can be the end of them. I played a game against Custodes a while ago where I had a Terminator squad that I put ready to charge Telemon, but I put him out in the open, and it just destroyed them the next turn.
Yeah.
I think I started the turn with 6 Terminators, and by the end, I had my Terminator captain with 1 wound left.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think without further ado, final score, standard Terminator squad, 8.5.
Yep.
And the Assault Terminator squad, 7.5.
I think that's a pretty fair score for them. Again, I would love to have given them higher if they just didn't have that context of Gravis. But other than that, I have nothing else to talk about. If you have nothing else to talk about, I think we'll go ahead and close out this episode.
Yeah, so a few things I did want to touch on. We saw amazing support from our first video. So thank you to all of our viewers. It was really incredible to see so many people are watching this and enjoying it and leaving comments and liking, subscribing, all that. So we really appreciate that, and we're glad that all of you are enjoying our ramblings about what we nerd out on, and we hope you continue to enjoy it. And like we said at the end of the last one, if you have any suggestions, please let us know in the comments, and we would be happy to work towards it.
We did get a suggestion on the last episode that we posted, and I have been working on writing a script for that one, so hopefully that will be coming up here shortly.
Yeah, we're excited for it, and I think it'll be a return in a way to our first episode and provide a little more context for how Space Marines operate. But like we said in the first, if you also have suggestions for other armies, we're more than happy to do that, because Space Marines have a lot of data sheets and we don't want to burn out too quick.
That being said, if you have any suggestions, whether it be for other armies or other data sheets within the Space Marine Codex, please leave it in the comments. And thank you all for watching.
Yes, thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon.